Okay. Welcome back to the Novel Idea Society. This time
Thank
just
you.
as yourself. Um,
Yes.
this book just came out. We're talking about what wild women do. Here, this
Yes.
is the copy I have.
Yeah.
Why two different covers?
It's the markets are so different. I mean, this is the thing. I don't think people realize how much influence like Indigo has, for example, in choosing book covers or helping to make a decision about book covers. So really the market is considered very seriously, and the Canadian and the US market are just different. And so sometimes the retailers are like, no, we need to go with something different here. So that's what happened.
So which
Can't
version is this? Is this the Canadian one
That's
or
the Canadian version. Yeah, the US version is this one.
the flowered cover? Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So
Which
it's
one
in
did you,
hardcover in the US.
which was the one you wanted originally?
I will not answer that question. To keep everyone safe, me especially. No, I mean I like both covers. Oh, that's all I'll say.
Okay. Is this you? Is this you?
No, it's not. But
Because
I've
it
had
kind of
someone
looks
else
like
ask
you.
me. I should do one of those book covers, where you put I can never, I've tried to do that before, these amazing book covers that people do on Instagram where they hold the book up and then, their face is the face on the book and it all lines up perfectly. It looks very impressive, but I don't know how you do it to get
Okay.
to.
Tell me where this whole story came from because I did not know what to expect with this book and I am emotionally attached to these characters. I have not talked to anyone who even just kind of liked it. Like everyone has really, and they're nodding along, loved this book. So
Oh, thank you.
where did this come from?
Oh, it came from, I mean, this book went through so many different iterations. After Recipe for a Perfect Wife, I knew I wanted to write another book that was like a dual timeline and also dual character, like two characters, dual narrative. And I just initially, I mean, I was joking about this with someone the other day. When I sold Recipe as a two-book deal, they want you to put in a sentence or two about what the next book will be about. And I think I had written something like identical twins who are YouTubers, there's a murder, and then one twin takes over the other twin's life. And it was like this dark psychological thriller. And I'm not a thriller writer. I don't know why I thought that I was going to write a thriller. I actually don't really want to write a thriller. And so then when it came time to actually write it, I had to revisit this idea. And so Rowan really came to me first because Rowan came out of this idea of someone who is, in that millennial age and podcasting, but maybe reluctantly. And she's also a creative, and what happens to her when she's feeling all of this pressure about
Mhm.
her life and about that stage of life. And then I knew I needed a counter perspective and I wanted it to be historical. And I grew up in the 70s. And so Eddie sort of just arrived as this really well formed character who brought me to her camp and said, this is where we're going to tell this story. But she was a very alive character for me as I was writing through the whole story. It was an interesting experience writing her because sometimes, there are things that she says and I'll read them or people will remind me of some of the quotes and mantras she said. And I'll be like, yes, yes, that's exactly right. And then I forget, like, oh, wait, you wrote that, Karma. It is Eddie Calloway in the book, but that actually came out of your brain. So yeah, it was, that's sort of how it started. And, as a child, I had gone to this place called Camp Sagamore in the Adirondacks, which is a real place. And so Camp Calloway is based on Camp Sagamore. You can still go and visit. It was the Vanderbilt's great camp, and it was a really special, cool place. They had an open air bowling alley that my sister and I would play in all the time. So that became like the setting for me. when I was imagining them at Camp Calloway. So it was a story idea that just took a lot of different twists and turns. A lot of editing. Yeah.
The Camp Calloway setting could have easily, like you describe it so well, it easily could have been a horror movie. Like the way it's described, when
Oh,
you think,
I'm happy to
and I
hear
don't mean it
that.
like a scary way, but when you think back to like the horror movies that often involve camps, that often were set in the 70s,
Yes, yes.
rustic, you get
Yeah,
lost, you don't know where you're
for
going.
sure.
It very much could have gone. The descriptor was so well done, it could have gone really
It
any
could have
place.
gone, I know, very dark. Well, I mean, I love horror. I love horror. And I love making my settings feel like another character. And so that was really important for me with this camp. And yeah, I mean, I guess it could have been a thriller or a horror, but I don't really know how to write a thriller. So it is the book that it is.
You did keep the YouTuber though, and he seemed like a really
Yep,
annoying human being.
for sure. Super annoying. I mean, every book needs a bit of a villain, and Seth got to be that villain. But he's also sort of just a little bit. I mean, oh, Seth, he's just making so many mistakes, and that's fine. Everyone is making mistakes, especially when they're 30 years old and trying to figure life out. But he really just he he just was not well suited. Let's just put it that way. Maybe
Did
to
you base
her
him on
and to the
anyone?
goals. I didn't. I
No.
just pictured somebody who would be annoying for me. You know, if I was there trying to do this really creative thing and hoping for something more than where I am right now. So I'm looking in the future and I'm imagining that. And I just thought, okay, well, who's going to be the person who's really going to make this a very difficult 1 month stay for her? And, you know, what are the things that he's going to do that are really going to push her to examine her own values and her own ambition and what she wants? So that's Seth. No one likes him. Everyone's like, oh, he's just, I mean, he's not meant to be liked, but you know.
Okay, I'm going to read some of these comments in the chat first before I move on. Terry says, as someone who is going through a change of relationship status with a hunting lodge in the sticks, exploring options to make the land and 6-bedroom place retreats for women, I love this book.
Oh, do it. I've had so many people say, I wish Camp Calloway was a real place that we could go. Me too.
Terry, are you in Saskatchewan still, or have you moved? She's typing. With bated breath. As someone turning 30 tomorrow, I'm glad you also think nobody here really has their life figured out yet.
No, I mean, I picked 30 quite purposefully. Like the ages of these two women were quite purposeful because I feel, first of all, I feel like they're both inside of me. I still feel like Rowan and I feel like Eddie all at the same time. But I think that age 30 is such an interesting time because you're just old enough where you have this idea. And now that I'm 51, I know that it was not true, but it felt very true at that time that you are supposed to have it all figured out. And people are doing all kinds of important things in their lives with relationships and careers. And so if you're not quite there or where you want to be yet or hope to be, it can feel very confusing. Like, did I miss something? Am I not going to get where I need to be? Like, am I not supposed to have it figured out by now? And so Rowan, I wanted her to live in that place where she's like, I should know, but I don't know. And so what do I do about that? And Eddie, you know, being, I was turning 50 around the time I was working on this book. And for me with her, it was so much about the starting to let go, like not holding things so tightly and to understand actually how little we know about anything and that that's okay. And so, you know, I learned a lot writing these women and just revisiting what it felt like to be 30 and realizing what it feels like to be 50 and, you know, what's coming next. So if you're 30, don't worry. I mean, you're not supposed to know. Like you're not supposed to know yet. It's fine.
Does anyone ever really know though?
No, this is what I'm saying. I know less now at 51 that I'm sure I knew at 30. 100%. I don't know what's going on anymore. I mean, maybe it's the pandemic, maybe it's perimenopause. I don't know. But I feel like this is one of those ages where it's like, okay, but I care less about not knowing. That I think is the difference. It just doesn't matter. It's
Mhm.
okay. I can just be curious and figure it out as I go.
Carrie would like to know what the inspiration was for the handbook.
Actually, the so in Recipe for a Perfect Wife, I used our cookbook, and there were recipes that sort of started each chapter for my character in the 1950s, and then I had these little pieces of advice, this old marriage advice that would start the modern day chapters. And so I knew I wanted to do something epistolary with this book as well. But it took a while to figure out what that was going to be. And my mom had a moosewood cookbook. I mean, I grew up in the 70s, so a lot of the stuff that is in this book is pulled directly from some childhood experience I had or a memory I have of that. And I remember the moosewood cookbooks, which I still have one of them, and just the illustrations, like just the very sort of rustic feel of the recipe and the pictures. And I just thought, Eddie she would have these women here for a week, and then she would very much want to give them that experience to take with them, for the rest, to remind them, like the moments where they feel a little bit wobbly, then this is a place to come back to and to feel that confidence again. So that's where it started. I had fun with that handbook. It was fun to write those pieces.
Can you eat stinging nettles?
Yes, yes,
I
you
actually
can.
wondered that for the entirety of the book because I am the person that would
Yeah.
end up not grabbing them with gloves, would end up with the
Mhm.
itchy nut situation, and then be like, "Can you actually eat these? Like, what? Have you done it yourself?"
No, I haven't. But I mean, I have been stung by stinging nettles, but I have never eaten them. But yes, you can. You can. There's all kinds of things you can eat. Ferns and fiddleheads. I mean, I'm sure lots of people have had fiddleheads. We had a lot of fiddleheads growing up. Dandelion salads. Child of hippies. Grew up on a farm. This was normal
I was going to
dinner
say, so
fare.
are you an outdoorsy? I use that in quotations. Would you consider yourself an outdoorsy person, or did this take some research to write?
No, I would consider myself to be outdoorsy mostly. Like I do love being in nature. I don't want to be like days away from a bathroom. So I'm in that place where it's like I don't really want to be off the grid, but I do like getting a little bit lost in the woods.
Um, let's talk about the death because everyone here, if you haven't finished it, Eddie dies. I'll
Well, I
spoil it for
mean,
you.
she's gone missing, right? And so there's only so many things that have happened to her,
Yeah,
and it's pretty clear.
but the moment where you find out that she actually fell and she
Mm-hmm.
realizes, oh my God, no one knows where I am.
Yeah.
And in that, because of when it happened too, right? There's no find my iPhone. There's no like
No.
even off the grid. There's no one to help you, but this isn't a time where there was really no one to help you. And that
Yeah.
moment where she realizes, oh my God, I'm going to die out here. And then we just don't dwell on we don't
Yeah.
really come back to it. It just, she realizes it's going to happen, and then we
Yeah.
move on. What decision did you make into going into how she got hurt and deconstructing the death that we wondered about for the entire book?
Well, I knew that that was what was going to happen to her. I mean, that was always the way that that was her fate from the beginning. But the not lingering, it just, because once her story is over, her story is over. And then we have to go with Rowan because there's no one else to tell Eddie's story except what you're learning through the handbook and through other pieces. But I don't know. It's just that was one of those scenes too when I wrote it. And she is sort of having a full circle moment where, you know, someone very important to her is then present with her, or, you know, in her memory or whatever it is in that moment as she's dying. And I knew that that just was enough. There's like a, you know, I mean, people may have wanted me to write more on that, but there's just like this instinct thing when you're writing where you're like, okay, this is the end of her story. This, as she's telling it, this is where we end with her. But yeah, that was a sad scene.
Is that a
I
real
mean,
fear for
a fear for me?
you? Yeah.
I don't think so.
You're
Getting
not someone
lost and
who would
never being
wander off.
found.
I mean, like just wandering off that far. And see, as someone who is very accident prone, I
Yes.
make sure everyone knows where I am, where
Oh,
I'm
I
going.
do. Yes, I'm very much a planner, and I also blame it on being a mom, where I've gone like 8 steps into the 7 different things that could happen, and I have contingency plans for all of those things that could happen. But weirdly, I mean, I have so many anxieties and fears, but weirdly, getting lost and falling down a cliff is just not one of them. But you know, I certainly would not want that to be my fate. But yeah, I was just more for me with Eddie, that was more of the, you know, all the decisions that led to her being in that place and all the things that she was trying to do that led to her being in that place. It's just one of those moments where you're like, this is totally unfair, and why is it, you know, why her, and why did it happen this way? And but that's life. I think that is just sometimes the way life is. So
With
yeah, that's
the $100,000 in the 1970s, that is significantly more money
yeah.
than it is today. Did you factor that in when you thought about the amount?
Yeah, I mean, it needed to be enough that it was a life-changing amount of money, like for whoever would find it in the present. But Eddie was very, very wealthy. Like her family was incredibly wealthy. So that, you know, she had lots of money. So she wanted it to be a significant sum too. I mean, there's the truth about Eddie is that she has guilt about her wealth and about her privilege. And part of how she decides to handle that for herself is by running these retreats at no cost to these women, and then by doing, you know, this treasure hunt where she can really change someone's life, or a couple people's lives. That was really just for her a way that she was managing some of that guilt that she held over from her former life.
Was it hard to wrap this book up? Because I felt very attached to these characters when it was over. And that doesn't always happen for me. Like sometimes I think about characters after a book is over, but I felt that I had more of an emotional attachment to these characters that I normally do. Was it hard for you to just be like, okay, that's it, that's all? Or did it just come to a natural end for you?
It came to a natural end for me, but they're never gone. I honestly think about them all the time still. And I mean, I haven't touched that book in over a year. But Eddie in particular, I think about her a lot because I do feel like, you know, in this weird way, she was also there teaching me some lessons as I was writing this story. And for that reason, like she feels like a real person to me who just, you know, like I said, like a Facebook friend who I very rarely talk to anymore, but we'll get a birthday notification from sometimes. But yeah, no, it was a natural end for me, but I'm glad that they stayed with you. That's nice to hear.
Um, Terry says, I'm curious about the various women's relationships in the book. Terry, what do you mean? You can unmute if that's faster.
There we are. It's just that there was so many aspects to the women's relationships from the woman that worked in the restaurant and her relationship to, and she was connected, right, to both Eddie and then I just
Mhm.
look, when you look at all the different ways that the women's relationships were written about in the book, I just was, I guess, curious about the inclusion, right? From lesbian relationships to the camp sort of director's relationship with other women,
Yeah.
and then bring that into modern day with Rowan and
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wanted it to feel just representative of like a community of of people and women in particular, because the story was mostly focused on the women. And again, just having it be reflective instead of, trying to specifically, it wasn't like I was aiming to have a same-sex relationship in the story. It just, that was all very organic. When Jude came to my mind, I knew that Eddie was not just in a relationship with Samuel. I knew that she, because of when it was and the ways that she was trying to break out of some of the confines of her past. She was very much like, I love who I love, and whoever that is who I love right now. And so the relationships between them and having the past and the present be connected, like through, and this is where I forget people's names. Glenda, right? Is that the diner? This is what happens when you write a book a year ago and then you just forget. And Jess, who also became sort of like the embodiment of Eddie for Rowan, by being this off the grid woman who was really very much in charge of her own agency, and she was helping Rowan to see that. So you have to link the past and the present somehow, because these two will never meet. And so having relationships that can provide that sort of netting between the past and present and between the women was important to me. But weirdly, the relationships sometimes just, I mean, it's a weird thing with writing. You have plans, and the plans don't always end up being as expected. And you're like, oh, who are you? And where did you come from? Okay, I guess you're in the story now. So let's see how you fit in.
Okay, when we talked about Maggie Knox, and the way that you wrote books with Marissa,
Mm-hmm.
it was like you plotted things out and you filled in chapters and you made the book happen. How do you write by yourself? How do stories start? Do you just write and write and write and hope for the best, or do you have plot points or landmarks, or how do you write when you write a story like this, especially when you're crossing, I was gonna say time zones, but you know what I mean when I say that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. two different time eras. I usually have a pretty clear idea of how I want the story to unfold. I take a lot of time to understand the character as best as I can before first draft. And you never really know your characters. At least I don't, until I'm into my second or third draft. But I try to get as many pieces about who they are and what their past looked like, and what their birthdays are and their best friends, and that helps me to make them feel more authentic in my first draft. But wait, now I've forgotten the question. You guys have to excuse me. It's like 9 p.m., right? And in my world. And I got up at 4 because I write every morning at 4:30. So I'm like half here. So part of the question was about the how do I write the story,
point A
right?
to point B?
Yeah, see, and now I've already lost my point A to point B, but I don't know. It's 51 perimenopause and, bedtime. Once I've done the synopsis, then I have an idea that the story has legs. And I can't really start writing anything until I've done research and I've done my synopsis and I have a good character sketch. But once I put the first words down, I just go. And occasionally I'll look back at my synopsis, but hardly ever. It sort of
Yeah.
just gives me a, then I let the feeling of the story move me. I'll be like, oh, I need to get back to this character, or I really need this to happen. So I sort of just try to let it flow. I don't edit in my first draft. I just try to let it all come out. But interestingly, with Wild Women, and I've never done this before, I wrote all of Rowan's story, and then I wrote all of Eddie's story, and then I put them together.
Oh. And it
Yeah.
worked okay, or did it take some
I
significant?
mean, it was a mess. Like, they were both fine in their individual stories, but then trying to get the balance between them, and trying to find, how long do you spend with one before you go to the other? That took a long time to get that sorted out.
Who do you let see your drafts? Like, at what point do you bring other people in for feedback? Like, how many drafts in before you're like, you can look at this now?
My agent will sometimes look at like stuff in a first draft. Like, sometimes she'll read the whole thing. Sometimes it will just be a few chapters or 100 pages, just so that, it's like, okay, I need somebody else to just tell me that I'm on the right track. She did that with Wild Women. She's doing that with the book I'm reading right now. But outside of her, nobody. That's
And
it.
like,
I
does
just,
anyone ever read other drafts, or is it just you and the agent and that's it?
it's just me and my agent, usually. Occasionally, I will get other author friends to read a draft when I may be like a second or third draft in before it's going to my editor. But yeah, normally I just try to be alone with the story as much as I can, because otherwise this is why I don't edit as I'm writing, because I find it, if I'm going back and editing, I'm already changing how the story's unfolding in the future, and I need to just get the story out before I can go back and start making changes to it.
Did your editor make any significant changes from where you started to where you finished?
Oh yes, there are
And
so many changes. I think probably nearly every word was touched at least once,
oh,
and
really?
some multiple times. It's such a, like, we edited Wild Women for, I don't know, 8 months maybe. I was working with two editors at the same time, and so it was intense
Two
for
editors, how does
sure.
that work? Like, did they work together, or did you have two different
Yeah,
people simultaneously working on the
they
same book?
worked simultaneously on the same document. So then I would get it back with all of their notes, and then I would work from there. That's partly why it takes that long, because you've got three people actively working in a manuscript.
Do you
But
ever hate their suggestions?
did I ever what?
Hate their suggestions?
There were times where I pushed back on suggestions.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the nice thing about editors, like, they're really there to help guide you and to also offer another perspective, which is important because you can get really lost in the story. And sometimes you're like, this is where we're going. And it's important to be willing to consider another direction for the story. But ultimately, they always say, like, this is your story, and so if you really don't agree with something, then you get to leave it. But I mean, I pushed back on a few things, but not that I insisted had to stay as they were. But mostly it is really a partnership. It really is.
I ask that because I just think, even as a journalist, and I know you're a former journalist,
Mm-hmm.
when you write a story and you get really attached to it and they say cut it down,
Yeah,
and you're like, but I can't. Like, I'm very attached to the way
I
that
know.
it's done, and this
Yep.
is not a 200-300 page story that I'm dealing with. So that's why I ask if it's hard for you to work on that, because this is a much more significant time investment than a daily news story.
It is, but it is really different. Like, I found being edited as a journalist was a totally different experience, because I would get it back and it would be like, cut it down, and there would be red slashes. And in some cases they would just cut stuff out. Like, this needs to go. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay. And then you're on a really tight deadline. And so ultimately, that's what needs to happen. It's a little more soft, I guess, in book editing. it is more of a conversation than it is a red line pen through something. It really doesn't feel like that.
That sounds much more pleasant.
It is, but I learned a lot by being a journalist and being edited in that environment. It made it easier for me when I came over to book publishing, for sure.
B says, what was something that got cut out that you were sad to see leave the book? Was there anything that you can remember?
Oh my gosh. It feels all like a big swirl now. Like I don't even remember what was there and then what got added. And I can't think of anything that I had to cut that I was heartbroken about. I can't think of anything.
Terry wants to know about the crows. Where did the inspiration to include them come from?
Crows. I came across this article because I became a birder also. I turned 50 and then I was suddenly a birder. And then I knew that birds had to play a big part in this story because of the forest. And I came across this story about a crow that would retrieve gifts and bring it to this guy. And he started running these little mini experiments on this crow. And then he got really obsessed about crows and how smart they are and the things that they could do. So I was like, whoa, this is really interesting. Like they have this ominous sort of feeling to them because they're all black and they don't have pretty songs and they don't have pretty colored feathers. And they have that just terrible, like caw-caw kind of like really, throaty call. But they are smart and they remember people's faces and they teach next generations of crows. So they pass down knowledge between generations, which I think is just fascinating. And because I love the idea of, in particular, like the legacy of women from one generation to another, I was like, oh, this is just beautiful. These crows are not only passing down knowledge about things like how to build tools, where to go to get food, they also pass down knowledge about if this is a bad person, this is their face, and now you need to know their face so that you remember that this is a bad person. I mean, that's like next level sort of stuff with these birds. So I got a little obsessed with the crows. And then it just fit. I needed something to connect Eddie and Rowan in real time, in the present. And so that became a way for me to connect them again, with the handbook, but also with a living thing.
Okay. I can ask lots of questions. I do this for a living. So I'm going to open it up to everyone else and not hog the floor. So if you have a question, you can unmute and ask your question. If there's a question in the room, I'll show you. There are other people here. Right?
Hello.
They just wave on you.
Yeah.
If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. You can ask them yourself. You can raise your hand. We're not particularly fancy here. Anybody? No dying questions? Suddenly they're very shy.
Can you talk about the men? Because there weren't many positive examples of men in the book. They were all problematic, and maybe that was just the lens I was reading it through, going through a breakup of a relationship, but it just felt like, other than Jess's husband, who was kind of cool, the rest of them were just...
Well, Samuel is a kind and good man.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like he definitely, there's not anything really nefarious about Samuel or Aiden. But then it's really only, who else is in the story? So we have Seth.
Neighbors that were so threatening.
Oh yeah.
And Seth was a flake, and
Seth was a flake.
Her husband was a flake.
Her husband,
Eddie's husband.
I mean, partly it's the generation. Partly it was meant to represent how women were viewed. I mean, I really am only interested in the women usually in my
Yes.
stories, and the men provide a lens in which to view the women through. And
Interesting.
in those cases, like with her husband, you know, he was perfectly fine, but he was a 1950s husband of privilege, and there are expectations for women then and now. And, you know, that everyone was just playing their part. With the camps, you know, a woman running a camp like that, running a business like that was not super common. It was happening, but it was starting to happen more than it had. And so, you know, the other camp owners also just don't like the change. So they were there to represent in general the state of the mood of the men of the patriarchy, essentially. You know, the patriarchy's got to be in there. It's a feminist book. And so that's who showed up. So yeah, I mean, the men are never heroes in my stories, although Samuel is sweet. He's a sweet, sweet guy. Because it's not really about them.
Samuel was a very interesting character through the book, and I almost wanted to know a little bit more about him, because he was this one man that was amongst all of the women in the camp all the time, and their relationship as kids, and I just thought he was really an interesting person.
Sorry, I missed who it was that you were talking about.
Samuel.
Oh, Samuel. Yeah. I mean, he probably could have his own book, I suppose. But once again, you know, it's like you have to choose who you spend time with. And this was really Eddie and Rowan's story. And so Samuel was viewed through Eddie's lens.
Anybody else? I'm literally leaving the camera in your direction, so.
Well, I love twisted murder mystery plots, and there was a really brief moment that I thought, oh, is Judith evil? Did Judith do something? Am I the one who thought that?
You might be.
It might be just like because you're used to reading stories like that, you're looking for the breadcrumbs and the red herrings, perhaps. I had someone on another interview who thought that Jess was a ghost. Like they thought it was paranormal, that she wasn't real. Which I thought was very, you thought that too? Yeah.
I thought it might have been a ghost of Eddie somehow.
Right. Yeah, I could have done that. I mean, she was very real. She was not a ghost, but I liked that people thought that. I thought that was that would have been a nice little twist. It would have changed the book significantly, but.
Feel like a teacher at the front of the room that's just like staring them down one by one.
I know, I feel like I'm staring them down too. I don't mean to.
Oh, well, there's a giant screen with your, like, there's
Oh,
so you are staring them down.
I am staring them down. Sorry, everyone.
Well, let's look at the future for Karma Brown, because you seem to be very busy with all of the things that have come up with your name and with your alter ego. What are you working on right now?
Right now, I'm working on a novel, which I'm not really talking about very much, but it is a different genre again. So I'm switching genres. Nope.
You've
but
just
I
been
probably
very clear that you don't know how to
I gave
write
a
genre,
hint.
so.
I gave a hint earlier, but it's dark. It's still feminist, of course,
We love horror, so maybe I'm gonna guess it falls into that genre. Where are you at in the drafting? I know you don't talk about like until you're in a certain point. Are you still early in the drafting process of it?
I'm like half through the book, like halfway through, almost half.
Okay, so it's not
through
over
a first
yet.
draft. No, because I only really, I mean, I was working on Wild Women last year, and then there were the rom-coms, and so I really didn't write for the first 4 months of this year, which I haven't done in 10 years. So I just took a break, and started to think about this idea. It involves things that I don't know anything about. So I really had to go find an expert who could help me because of my protagonist's job is a job I don't know. It's a little bit speculative. So there was a lot of, just thinking time and research that went into it. So I'm about half done the first draft.
You had too much like happy, fluffy, and now you needed something dark and twisty.
I have always wanted to write a horror. So because it is my favorite genre. So that's what I'm doing.
Who do you read when you say you love horror? Who do you gravitate towards?
Well, Stephen King. I grew up on Stephen King. So, and he's probably one of my go-tos. Like I read The Shining on my Kobo at bedtime. So that is my nighttime read. I know. I find it relaxing.
Not normal, right?
You know what? I was at an event and someone who is a fellow horror lover, and we had this whole conversation about this, and I find it very relaxing. And he was like, I totally understand. And it is in some ways, if you can, because it's so different from the way life is, the way real life is, it's like so much worse. That you can kind of relax into the story because it's never going to happen like that. Like it just isn't going to happen like that. I mean, maybe The Shining could happen if you ended up in a snowy cabin and it was not a holiday rom-com. It was like the Christmas horror novel or something like that. Anyway, I know I can't convince people who don't like horror that it is actually kind of a lot like romance, but
the funny thing is my boyfriend convinced me this like over the holiday season. I got very into horror movies, like probably watched one a day for the month. For anyone who knows me knows I'm a giant chicken. So for me to like lean right in and I watched all of American Horror Story this year. That was my achievement for 2023.
Good for you. See, I'm more like about the books. I will watch some of the movies, but I like the books. Like Stepford Wives is probably my favorite book, and Josh Malerman, who wrote Bird Box. I love his books. Grady Hendrix is kind of a gentle horror for people who are not quite ready for like the really scary stuff. He wrote How to Sell a Haunted House. That was his most recent one. I mean, it was scary.
The reason I don't read it is because my imagination is too much. Like I can't watching it on TV. I can see exactly. And again, I know it's never going to happen, but there's this about getting it in my head. And I'm good with like the goriest of gory, horrible things. It's ghosts that kill me. I can't do it.
Oh, really?
I absolutely can't do ghosts. And I mean, I do.
Oh.
Obviously, I read and I watch and whatever, but it's
but they terrify you.
One thing they're afraid of. And it's because you made it a little bit.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm not afraid of ghosts, but I'm afraid of teeth. That's weird. When my daughter was losing her teeth, it was a really stressful time for me because I just can't even handle wiggly teeth. Like it's bad.
Is it the wiggling or the fact that you're holding a bone?
It's so many things. And my mom saved all my teeth from when I was a baby, like when I was little, and she brought them to me last year in this box. And I was like, I don't want these. I don't want my teeth. This is terrifying. It's like part of my skeleton. I don't want these teeth.
You could just make them into a necklace and give them back to her as an crafts project.
Awful stuff.
Okay, so you're working on something that it's like the equivalent of Voldemort, cannot mention it. But are you working on any more Maggie Knox stuff, or are you just like one book focus, like slowing down a little?
One book focus, slowing down a little. Maggie Knox has retired.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep, she's retired now. She's gone to Fiji. She's, resting and enjoying her time in the holiday romance sphere. Yeah, it's co-writing is a complicated thing, and it's really hard when you're on different schedules. And so we did it for 2 books, and then it was just like we are still writing our own books, right? So it was too much.
Was it a good experiment for you though? Like the books seemed to sell really well.
They did. Yeah, they were great. And it was such a pandemic inspired thing, and it really was a good thing to have going through that time. We were never in the same room when we were writing those books because everybody was locked down forever. So yeah, no, it was good, but it was just time to do something different. I like to hop around too. I don't tend to stay in one genre for too long, it seems.
Let's see, we got more questions. Um, B says everyone could be a ghost in the new book. That's not my ideal. Terry says
I'm trying to think if there's a ghost anyway. I think it's okay.
Terry's not doing anything scary on the acreage, and B says, are you interested in doing like a second Maggie Knox like project with someone else when you're done individual projects? Do you like writing with other people? And not to say anything negative about the experience you had, but is it something you'd want to do again?
I don't think so. And only because I really am I'm a bit type A. I'm very particular about how I write my books. And so I like to be able to like just get the first draft out as quickly as possible because I find that the hardest part to do. And when I'm editing, I'm really focused. Like I just don't look up from my desk for most of the day. And so I get a little like, it's really hard to do that with another person who has their own entire schedule. And so I think that it worked really well for our first book. And then our second book, we were having to write completely separately. Like I was writing and then she was writing, but we were never writing simultaneously because of our schedules. And that was hard. So I just don't think so. I think
Especially
I'm
now
just
that
more of
life's
a lone
back to
wolf.
normal.
Yeah. I think it's just it was good. It was fun. But I do think that I'm probably just a better solo writer because then I have full control. You know, like I have a kid and there's just so many other things going on. So
As a
it
type A
makes
person, I can appreciate that.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
control thing, which my therapist would tell me is something that I need to relinquish.
Well,
But
this is what I'm working on, like not holding on to things so tightly. This is, therapy is always very good for all of us and all these things. So, yeah,
okay,
type A
what's the
recovering.
best book you've read lately?
I'm not prepared.
What's the first thing that popped into your head?
Well, I just finished a book that it's not out yet. It's not out until the spring. I just actually read two cozy mysteries, which is not a genre that I read all that often, but I read The Mystery Guest, which was the follow-up to The Maid, Nita
Oh,
Prose, which just came out yesterday. What day is it?
Mhm.
Wednesday. So her second book just came out yesterday. So that one was really fun. And then I also read a book called How to Solve Your Own Murder, which is a cozy mystery again. And it was fun. It was very like Agatha Christie with Clue vibes. So it's out in April. So those are the last two books I read, and they just happened to be in the same genre, and they were fun. It was like a very different, light, even though there's a murder, of course, because it's cozy mystery. But cozies are nice. They're sort of like the romance of the mystery world, right? Like the holiday rom-com.
I mean, I was reading your book and John Stamos's autobiography at the same time. So
Yeah. Hey,
I mean, a little bit of everything, right?
you can multitask. That's fine.
I can. Okay. Last thing before I leave you. You're several books into this career now. You are a
Yes.
writer. This is what you do. So if someone is watching this now or later on YouTube, what advice would you give to them about getting that first draft of their first book?
Yes, this is one of those, I really try not to give a lot of advice because what works for me may not work for someone else. And really it's about trying out a lot of different things to see what works for you. But I always
That
say
is
like,
advice. That's good advice.
I guess that is advice. My only other thing is to say that the only job of a first draft is that it has to exist. And it doesn't have to be good, it just has to exist so that you have something that you can edit. So the goal is to get your butt in your seat and just get words down. And don't worry if they're good or not. They're not good. They're never good in the first draft. And if you think they're good, you're going to end up changing them So it's nice, like pat yourself on the back, you wrote some good words, but they're probably going to change. So it's just, you got to get the words down.
Some realist advice from Karma Brown.
Yeah. Realist advice. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for, I'll turn this back to the audience so you can see them. Thank you so much for spending time with us here tonight. Thank you for the book and the characters. And when you're finished writing the book that you can't talk about yet, we'll pick it up.
Oh,
and
I
give
did
it-
talk about it, didn't I? I gave away
Yeah,
some things, but it happens.
Thank you so much, Karma.
Thank you. It was really great to spend this time with you. And thanks for reading